Right, it's now 22, so we're now going to go into our next guest. He's somebody I've known now for maybe, on and off, maybe 3 or 4 years. And he's somebody that I became aware of because he's a blogger. That strange thing that's a new word on the internet, a blogger. And basically I got told about his blog about UFOs, and I started to look at some of his blogs and found them interesting. And over time I got to meet him, and he's become known for his radio show, Hospital Porters Against the New World Order, HPANWO, I think that's the right pronunciation, PANWO. And he does radio shows, he also makes documentaries. He's the guy with his arm out here doing this filming himself in Rendlesham, as you've seen, very good documentary. So without further ado, I'd like to hand you over to Ben Emlyn John. When you're ready. You're now on my time and Ben's time. Sorry. So you'll not do it next time if it's not on, because I'll take it on with you.
It's 30 seconds gone already.
Yeah.
That's a short speech. Testing. Yeah, sure.
Right, so I now over to Ben Emlyn Johns. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone. Thanks for coming, all of you. It's great. We've got like almost a sell-out crowd here. It's really amazing. Guys come from a long way away. Some of you I know, and I appreciate that. It's giving up your bank holiday weekend. Thanks to Gary and Katrine. They put on a great event here. We've only just had a taster of it. There's going to be more to come. And to Tino and Lynn and all the others who've supported in the background. Good for you guys. Really good for you. Now I hope you'll forgive me. My voice might sound a bit strange, or my speech might be slightly impeded. It's because I had a little argument on Tuesday with a dentist, and I lost a tooth in the fracas. You should see the state of him. And yeah, I think if I was an alien, I was living on Area 51 near a weather station. Colonel Charles Hall might call me the Norwegian with 23 teeth. But anyway, this is what my website, obviously, as Gary was saying, HPANWO, Hospital Porters Against the New World Order. There's just to prove that I am one of the Hospital Porters Against the New World Order. I was. That's me, the Portering Buddha. I've got a blog, as Gary said, and a YouTube channel. I've got my own radio shows, which I host. And it's very much a multimedia thing that I do now. And along with that, of course, I write for the magazine as well, which is really, really great. I'm very proud to be a part of that. It's really, really doing a good job. But today, what I'm going to talk to you about is we're going to go back in time. Now, Gary went back in time a bit to talk about the history of ufology and the serious study of this phenomenon. I'm going to talk to you about the history of exopolitics. Now, how many of you are familiar with the term exopolitics? Good, there's a lot of you, that's good, because you hear a lot about it now. It's a word that it appeared quite recently, actually. It was coined by Alfred Weber in around about 1995, I think it was. I'm not sure of the actual date, but you might think, well, that's just another word for ufology, but it's not. It's not quite the same thing. Ufology is loosely defined as the study of reports, visual records, physical evidence, and other phenomena related to unidentified flying objects. UFOs have been subject to various investigations over the years by governments, independent groups, and scientists. That's a combination of two definitions from MUFON and Wikipedia. So, exopolitics is slightly different. This is from Michael Saller, an exopolitician from Australia. Exopolitics is the study of the key individuals, political institutions, and processes associated with extraterrestrial life and technology is kept secret from the general public, elected political representatives, and even senior military officials. The supporting evidence is overwhelming. That's a very important clause within this definition. That decision-making is restricted on a strict need-to-know basis. And both words are derived from the Greek exo, first outside or external. Ufology, of course, is the study of UFOs, logic, it's like sociology, biology, etc. There's actually a song by the band Muse called Exopolitics, which is interesting to listen to. So what, I think in a sentence you could say that ufology is the scientific study of UFOs, and exopolitics is essentially it's ufologists who've made up their mind. It's a sense that we've looked at it in the sense we may not have all the answers, but we know they're real, we know they're extraterrestrial. They're not from this world, they're not weather balloons, they're not swamp cats, whatever they are. They're not explicable within the ordinary framework. So what are we going to do about it? That may be the definition of exopolitics. And being in ufology and being in exopolitics are two very, very different things. That there is a ufologist. That is an exopolitician. That is a ufologist. That is an exopolitician. That is a ufologist. That is an exopolitician. That is... I don't know what that is. No idea. Interestingly, Pope defines exopolitics as the militant wing of ufology. If you attended the Exopolitics Leeds Exopolitics Expos, you'll know that because this is what he wrote about when the Sun newspaper deemed itself and condescended to report on our conference. The militant wing of ufology. Really, you should have seen us when we were in Leeds. I mean, there were overflowing dustbins everywhere, piles of coffins outside the graveyards. It was a sight to behold. But I mean, there's no real kind of these things don't have to be exclusive. In fact, in modern ufology and exopolitics, there's probably more of an overlap than there is isolation. And there are plenty. The majority of ufologists are probably exopoliticians and vice versa in today's world. But where did it all begin? You see, we've got to go back in time and find out, look at the past so we can understand the present and move to the future. Now, exopolitics today is pretty much centred on the United States of America. That is where it's all coming out of. Of course, lots of other countries are involved, including this one, but it's centred on the USA. However, ufology, you could say, was the same. It's essentially an American-led community and field of study. But it was not always the case. And if you look into the history of exopolitics, it goes back further than you think. And there were exopolitical ideas all the way through the history of ufology. They did come into the UFO world, even very, very early on. However, it really took off, I think, 41 years ago, not in the United States, but in some way very different in this place. And this is Grenada. Now, you may have heard of Grenada, you may have been there on holiday. It's a very, very popular holiday destination. A small island in the Caribbean, famous for its, as you can see here, it's a beautiful beach, beautiful clean beach there, lovely blue sea, and I don't know about you, but I do want to roll my sleeves up and get these shoes off and really get into that sea. It's absolutely lovely. And most days you'll see cruise ships moored in the harbour, and it's said to be a great place to visit. It's famous, as with the rest of the Caribbean, it's famous for its stress-free lifestyle, friendly people, and good weather. So Grenada there's nothing really in this photograph or any of the material on Grenada you see in holiday brochures to indicate that this little island, just 12 miles across, a very small island, is one of the most important places in the history of exopolitics. And it began, I say, quite a while ago now. I think we traced to maybe 1975 or so. And it centres around this one. I'm going to expand that picture there, actually, you can't see it very well. These pictures are all different sizes. I'm sure I should have looked into that beforehand. You hear about a lot about enigmatic smiles, the Mona Lisa painting. She's famous for her enigmatic smile. So is this photograph of this guy. Not many people, I mean, ufology recognise him. How many people in this room recognise this man? Miles. Anorak! Anoraks, honestly. Take your tinfoil hat off. This is Sir Eric Gehry, and he's one of the most important individuals, actually, in this field. I think if it hadn't been for him, it's possible that we might not be here now, in this room. He was the first Prime Minister of Grenada. Now Grenada, this little island, was originally a British Crown colony. It became a British Crown colony in 1877. It was basically the British Empire bought it from the French. They paid us some money, and they said, you could do that in those days, you could buy and sell islands, and they bought Grenada from the French Empire, and so it became a British Crown colony, and into that society, this chap was born in 1922, Sir Eric Gary. He very, very quickly, as he grew up, became part of the movement for the independence of Grenada. So he wanted, like many people, to leave the British Empire and become an independent country. And so he worked his way up through that, being involved in trade unionism. He got involved in the colonial government of Grenada, and he applied for the Parliament. He stood for Parliament, was elected. He was a very popular leader. He was very keen on, he was an advocate of women's rights, which was a major issue in the Caribbean in those days. He was keen to protect the fishing industry of Grenada, which was very, very important. Before tourism really kicked off, it was essential to the actual well-being of the island. Let's take a sip of water because of my tooth. One moment. And his people called him Uncle. He was very well liked. And he had a kind of, he had an appeal which very few politicians in the modern world do, actually. In February of 1974, just 1 month, interestingly, after the Berwyn Mountains incident in Wales, Grenada was officially declared independent. And this man was very quickly elected Prime Minister, his first ever Prime Minister, under the Constitution, which he wrote. But he had other ideas which set him apart from other statesmen, which, apart from the Right Honourable Paul Hellyer MP, who I'm going to talk about later, he's really makes him unique among statesmen, I think. He was very keen on the issue of UFOs, very keen indeed. Now, when Grenada became independent, it was offered a seat at the United Nations. And Sir Eric Gary spent a lot of time at the United Nations headquarters in New York about various things to do with this country, but it included UFOs. Now, people might think, that's great. You know, it's the kind of thing that a lot of his political rivals actually used against him. And I'll come on to that later when I describe the various political problems he had. But he might be considered insane, unfit to rule. And the truth of the matter, though, is that the Caribbean does tend to throw up these eccentric kind of characters, like Bob Marley, for example, who it seems to be a natural hotbed of non-conformism, and I think Sir Eric was sort of a product of that. And so he was perfectly sane, he was as sane as you and me. He took the subject seriously because he knew it was wrong. That is Sir Eric Gary at the United Nations. I'm glad I've got this microphone that I don't have to hold, because later on in this talk I'm going to need both my hands free, and you'll see what I mean then. But here's a very interesting picture, a very important historical document. Sir Eric Gary there on the left, and then J. Allen Hynek, Jacques Vallée, and Colonel Larry Coyne. The three top ufologists, and you can see there's the United Nations logo above there. From 1975 onwards, he worked within the UN to try and make an issue of the UFO problem and get the United Nations to address it. And for a while, he achieved an awful lot of success. This, for instance, is part of the text of a speech he issued on the 12th of October, 1978. And you can get the whole thing on the Grenada government portal has a record of this. Grenada is now identified the world over with efforts to get the greater powers to share information on the phenomenon of unidentified flying objects, mainly because of the persistence with which we have been raising this matter in the General Assembly since 1975. We are satisfied that the subject of UFOs is of sufficient interest and importance for it to be raised again this year. Sightings of UFOs are not restricted just to one or two parts of our planet. Reports come in from all over the world today, and scientific analysis of these reports strongly suggests not only that a growing number of people believe that UFOs exist as a physical phenomenon, but also more and more countries believe that a more in-depth investigation into this phenomenon might make a significant contribution towards the well-being of the planet Earth, as well as towards man's better understanding of himself and his purpose on Earth. It's almost like he knew more than he was going to. That last sentence is particularly important. It's almost like he knew more than he was saying. He might have heard of things such as the crash retrievals, which I'm going to talk about later. And he refers here to Lee Spiegel, several other ufologists. In addition, we are in touch with scientists, research groups, writers, and people in all walks of life, from all parts of the earth, people who have expressed great interest in what we are attempting to do here in the United Nations, and who have promised support when the matter comes up for discussion in the special political committees. Really amazing thing. So he went further. He really took this seriously. What he did was he called for 1979 to become the International Year of the UFO. Now we know the United Nations does have these international years, and they give every year a title. There was the International Year of the Child, there was the International Year of Energy, the International Year of the Environment. He wanted to dedicate an entire United Nations year to the subject of UFOs. And he, as you can see here, he issued one of Grenada's commemorative UFO stamps. He ordered the Grenada Post Office to issue a set of stamps about the UFO matter. It says here, $2, research into UFOs on a stamp. Anyone here into stamp collecting? Not got one of these? If you get one of these, please let me know. And as you see here, this is the United Nations building, and with a little disc-shaped UFO in the top left there. The quest to discover more about UFOs and related phenomena. This may actually be, this painting, this little picture that accompanied the release of these stamps, may have been inspired by something that's happened 5 years earlier. John Lennon, who lived in New York at the time, reported seeing a UFO by the River Hudson on the waterfront. So it's quite something there. He also wanted to establish a centre for UFO studies on the island of Grenada, and he wanted to basically assemble again special telescopes and things like that to do sky watching on his island. Some of you I know have been to the International UFO Congress. I know some of you have. Now that particular Congress started in 1991, but I mean it kind of continued on from an earlier one. And the first ever International UFO Conference took place in Acapulco, Mexico in 1977, and Sir Eric Gehry spoke on the platform there. I think this is the only time in history that a serving head of state has ever spoken at a UFO conference. It's really quite amazing. It must have been an amazing thing to be there, to actually see that. And he wanted to host the 1979 International UFO Conference on Grenada. He offered to do that. Of course, you may wonder, what did his people think of this? What did the average Grenadian in the street think about their taxpayers' money being spent on research into flying saucers? Well, from what I gather, it didn't seem to affect his popularity very much. Because obviously he had to be careful about what his people thought of him, because otherwise they would kick him out of office. They would elect somebody else, and so his popularity was necessary. From what I gather, it didn't seem to have affected his political career adversely at all. Unfortunately, other matters soon would. I'll come to that in a minute, but more earthly issues soon came to light, which did very adversely affect Sir Eric Gehry's political career. Now, this is not the first time that the United Nations has brushed up against what is out there. And there's several other examples I'm going to give you. Now this is what's happened is something very interesting. This was in 1986, I believe. A young woman from New York called Linda Napolitano reported that she was abducted by extraterrestrials. She lived in an apartment block like many New Yorkers do. And she reports that she was paralysed and levitated out of her bed by these aliens, who then, quite frighteningly, because I think she was on the 6th or 7th floor, manoeuvred her out of the window, through the glass, incidentally, they didn't have to open the window, up to a spacecraft. Now what's very unusual about this is that this particular abduction had a witness. Someone was driving past on a nearby road and saw this woman hanging in midair with these little aliens around it, as you can see in this picture here. And this was the man. He's never, I don't think he's actually commented, but there's reason to believe that this is the man who witnessed it, who did actually report privately. This is what he'd seen, and he did make a report, although he denies it or he hasn't commented on it. This is a man called Javier Pérez de Cuellar. He's a former Secretary General of the United Nations, which is interesting. I mean, he was actually after. What happened was that when Sir Eric Gehry was involved in the United Nations, the Secretary General was an Austrian guy called Kurt Waldheim. I think this man followed immediately afterwards, Javier Pérez de Cuellar, and he was the guy who witnessed this, you believe. And I think many of you may be familiar with this. You may have seen this on YouTube. It's very easy to find. Very famously, on 2 occasions, Ronald Reagan, President of the United States, was actually doing speeches to the UN General Assembly, and he mentioned the extraterrestrial issue. He said, as a hypothetical thought experiment, he said, imagine how quickly our worldly differences would fall to the wayside and be considered irrelevant if we were faced with an extraterrestrial threat beyond our Earth. At the time, we thought this was an allegory because at the moment he was working with Mikhail Gorbachev to end the Cold War. But really, was he implying more than he let on? We don't know exactly whether he was signalling to somebody or in some way. Because there's reports that he met with Steven Spielberg, the director of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and there was an interesting conversation there associated with the UFO matter. Eric Gehry, he also met with President Jimmy Carter while he was in New York, in the United States. He went to Washington and met with the president. This is interesting because Jimmy Carter, to this day, maintains that he witnessed a UFO when he was staying, I think he was on the ranch, he was with his friend Shirley MacLaine, the author and UFO writer, and they did see an object in the sky. And he said that, he's always said that, and he says that to his day. So maybe he and Sir Eric must have found some rapport there, as maybe developing a special relationship with each other, which was really quite something. It's really quite amazing. Now, on the 18th of December 1978, the General Assembly issued this directive, 33/426. The General Assembly has taken note of the statements made and draft resolutions submitted by Grenada at the 32nd and 33rd session of the General Assembly regarding unidentified flying objects and related phenomena. The General Assembly invites interested member states to take appropriate steps to coordinate on a national level scientific research and investigation into extraterrestrial life, including unidentified flying objects, and to inform the Secretary General of observations, research and evaluation of such activities. The General Assembly requests that the Secretary General to transmit the statements of the delegation of Grenada and the relevant documentation to the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space so that it may consider them at its session in 1979. The Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space will permit Grenada, upon its request, to present its views to that committee at its session in 1979. The committee's deliberation will be included for its report, which will be considered by the General Assembly at its 34th session. So there in black and white, Squire. This is exactly the kind of thing we're seeing, in a sense, the same process today. With people like Stephen Bassett, who I'm going to talk about in a minute, and Dr. Stephen Greer. They want, firstly, national governments and various other organisations and the United Nations to issue this kind of legislation. This is an official, it's got a code number, you can look it up on the United Nations website, you will find this statement there. In theory there, we already have a mandate for the serious consideration of the UFO phenomenon by international law. So this was quite a long time ago. Like I said, this was in 1978. It's a long time ago. And what a lot of progress was made, thanks to Sir Eric Gehry. And if that continued, things could be very different today than they are now. Who knows? But it all went terribly, terribly wrong. On March the 15th, 1979, Sir Eric Gairy was in New York having another conference, another consultation with Waldheim, when he received some terrible news from home. His principal rival on Grenada in Parliament was a man called Maurice Bishop. And Maurice Bishop was the leader of a party called the New Dual Movement. This dual stands for Joint Endeavour for Workers' Education and Liberation. It's essentially a Marxist-Leninist group that was supported by Cuba. On that day, taking advantage of Sir Gairy's absence, no doubt, Bishop staged a coup on Grenada. He and his colleagues in the party, they seized weapons which had been smuggled into the island in oil drums, and they marched into the government house and took over, and they overpowered the police. There was no loss of life. The police surrendered, the officials of the Parliament building surrendered, and Maurice Bishop declared himself Prime Minister of Grenada, and he suspended the original constitution which Gairy had written. What he also did was, one of the first things he did was to outlaw Gairy's party and to exile Sir Eric Gairy from the country, which meant that Sir Eric could no longer come back to his country. He was not allowed to come back to his own country. The people of Grenada went along with this. I mean, it actually, paradoxically, this was actually considered something of a golden age for Grenada. In fact, they've actually named the airport on Grenada Maurice Bishop Airport. The reason was that basically, for a short time, Grenada became one of the richest islands in the world for its size and population. But this, a lot of money was pumped into Grenada from Cuba. And the people were given an education. A lot of the Grenadian young people went off to Cuba to study at university. Some of them went to the Soviet Union to study there as well. It was basically because of this, it was essentially this foreign aid that was coming into Grenada, which is actually what caused this boom. It might not have lasted forever, even if it hadn't been stopped anyway. But Grenada, in a sense, became very, very important to the Soviet Union as a strategic asset in the region. If you remember, in 1960 there was the revolution in Cuba which put Fidel Castro into power, and Che Guevara and these guys. Bishop, of course, was good friends with Fidel Castro. There's some photographs of the two of them standing together, best buddies. So another communist nation in the Caribbean was very important strategically to the Soviets. So they basically sent Grenada all the money it needed. They had a blank check, basically. But things didn't stay stable for very long. We're talking about best buddies. Maurice Bishop had a best buddy, a guy called Bernard Cord, who was his deputy prime minister. And in March of 1983, just 4 years after the original revolution and the coup which deposed Gairy, interesting, I should say, Sir Eric Gairy was trapped in the United States, basically. He was offered political asylum there, and he had to stay in New York. But he had to watch his back, because the New Dual Movement had allies in the United States, including a guy called Mario Salas, no relation to Captain Robert, who had sworn to kill Gairy. And so Gairy was basically on a death list. And so he had to have bodyguards, he had to watch his back wherever he went out. Obviously, it must have been very difficult for him. Now, Bernard Cord, the Deputy Prime Minister of Maurice Bishop, in March of 1983, they had a big fallout, and Cord staged a coup against the Bishop regime. And one of the first things he did when he succeeded, because he did succeed, and Bishop was arrested. There was a firefight on the island, and Cord won, and his people won. Bishop was captured along with all his ministers. Cord killed him, killed Bishop and all his other ministers. So who needs enemies, as the saying goes? That's what your buddies do. These people are known as the Grenada 17, and there's a memorial to them in Georgetown today, the capital of Grenada. The result from this was that the United States chose to intervene, and they sent a task force to land on the island, just like they did in Iraq, and to depose Bernard Cord, which they did. And after that, the original 1974 constitution was restored, And this must have been a relief to Eric Gary because he was finally allowed to come home. And the prisoners were really, because Bishop actually locked up some of his supporters and put them on another little island, which is just off the coast. It's part of Grenada, but it's off the coast of Grenada. It was kind of like a prison camp, so those people were released as well. And so Sir Eric came home, but he didn't become Prime Minister. He ran for election several times and didn't succeed. I mean, it could be that his allure had gone. I don't know, maybe he was just, it's not a criticism, this thing happens, maybe he was just tired after everything that happened, but he didn't get elected. But he was in the Bishop regime actually, well, they did actually spread some of this propaganda about Gary being crazy because he was in the flying saucers. Bishop essentially was saying that Gary was mentally unfit, so he was not in a suitable position to rule. Therefore, that was another reason to justify his coup against Gary's government. Gary was, I mean, like I said, Gary was just eccentric. I mean, can you imagine David Cameron speaking at this event, Pro or something like that? Or Barack Obama speaking at the International UFO Congress? Oh, man, I wish if only this country had leaders like Sir Eric Gary. Now, of course, the question has to go out, and people have asked this question, and I considered it for a while. Was the coup in Grenada, did it have the ulterior motive of scuppering, was it done specifically to scupper Gary's UFO initiative, his disclosure initiative? I would say no. I would say it was just a serendipity on the part of the powers that be, the keepers of the truth embargo, as Steve Bassett calls them. They were just lucky. I mean, the thing about serendipity is sooner or later it runs out. I hope it does soon, but there's no evidence to suggest that this was done specifically to derail Gary and his UFO initiative. If evidence comes my way, please let me know. But I mean, this was something that happened a lot in that part of the world. The Caribbean was very much ever since the Cuba Revolution in 1960, it was very much was it 1959? It was somewhere around that area. It was very much a place where the Cold War was played out in proxy. The forces of Soviet socialism versus the democratic capitalism of the United States. These two forces were constantly locked in battle in the Caribbean during that time period. And what happened in Grenada is very much a product of that, I'd say. However, interesting document appeared on the BBC Caribbean website in 2010. Very interesting indeed. The UK foiled Gary on UFOs. This doesn't ask the question about whether, you can bet, I mean, you can suppose theoretically that there was definitely some machinations behind the scene trying to shut Gary down, trying to do something to stop him. Now this is actually, this article concerns some newly declassified telexes. These were secret telexes between the United Kingdom mission in the UN, Britain's ambassador to the United Nations, and telexes between there and the Foreign Service, the Foreign Office in Westminster. These telexes were classified, I think they were secret, or something like that. Nick Pope would know, he's not here. But these telexes have now become declassified, and anyone under 20 is looking at me saying, Ben, what? A telex? What's that? Imagine an email on a shopping till roll. Right, that's a telex. Okay. Now these telexes say basically that there was no talk about the fear of secrets of UFOs coming out, at least not in the open communications of these telexes. But they were saying things like, we believe that this pursuit of all this nonsense, this flying saucer nonsense, is not what the role that the United Nations was assigned for, and it might bring the UN into disrepute. Therefore, we recommend that our officers in the United Nations oppose the Grenada's motion immediately. So this is basically, it comes across as it's kind of, well, what will people think of us? What will people think of the UN if we start dealing with little green men? You've got to stop this now. You've got to stop it just for our own credibility, our public image, for goodness sake. So that's the kind of atmosphere, that's the attitude you hear in these, and this is the kind of thing you hear in these telexes. Keeping an eye on the clock. Got another 45 minutes, I believe. So I do hope you will take a moment of homage to Sir Eric Gairy, born 1922, first Prime Minister of Grenada, who tried to expose the truth, trying to get officialdom to recognise the UFO issue and deal with it. After he failed to take government office, he retired and he lived on Grenada for the rest of his life. He died in 1997 and is buried there to this day. You can visit his grave if you're ever in the area when you're not sunning yourself on those sun lounges which you saw in the first slide in this series and wading through that beautiful blue sea. You might pop to a florist, get a bunch of chrysanthemums and lay them on that grave for this very, very underrated and unsung hero of the UFO field. So, what happened was, well, after the US invasion, there was a period of occupation which luckily was much less violent and not as long as the Iraqi occupation, after which the original constitution and the original government was restored and the Americans could leave Grenada to its own devices. By 1985, I think the last American troops left Grenada. Just 2 years later, though, the whole exopolitical issue was reborn. It was reignited, not by Sir Eric, but by this man, Timothy Good. And Timothy has spoken, he's spoken at the first UFO Truth Magazine conference. Was it the first one then?
It was, yeah.
It was, yeah, and he was awarded, you can see this on YouTube, the UFO Truth Magazine's Achievement Award. So he won that, the ultimate achievement in the UFO business. So this Timothy Good is actually a very, very accomplished musician. He's a violinist and he plays in a classical orchestra. He's also recorded with people like Rod Stewart, Paul McCartney, and Phil Collins. So he's well known. He's a very well respected man. But he's also one of the top UFO authors in the world. And this book here Above Top Secret. It's very much like all his books tend to be the same in style, and this is no exception. But this book seems to have had a far bigger impact than many of his other ones before or since. And several people, including Richard Dolan, have actually mentioned that reading this book is actually what got them where they are today. So there's some of the biggest names in this field were inspired by this particular book. Above Top Secret launches the reader into what was then a completely new idea for many people. And it really, even more than Sir Eric Gairy, he talks more openly about subjects that Sir Eric just hinted at in his UN addresses. I think Eric, he understood this sort of stuff, but Timothy Good says it openly. He says it openly. That is, the government know more about UFOs than the general public, far more. They have definitive forensic evidence that these things exist, and they are keeping it from us, and they are using various dirty tricks, which Gary was talking about earlier, to disinform, to debunk, and to distort the truth, the information that's coming out of the UFO field, to prevent the general public from getting a grasp on it. This book was the first to publish what's known as the Majestic 12 documents, which are quite familiar now. Very contentious. I've sort of wavered over whether they're real or not after hearing Bill Wood talk about them. I think there is, at least some of them are real. Timothy's book basically first released these documents in this country. It was James Chanderay was the guy who got the microfilm through, and he basically gave Timothy permission to publish them. There's also some interviews with Admiral of the Fleet Lord Hill Norton, who was Chief of the Defence Staff. Again, the skeptics say we're on anorak wearing tinfoil hat loonies and we're mentally ill. Well, Admiral Lord Hill Norton, he was on the organising committee of NATO. He was in charge of. He commanded a battleship during the Battle of the Atlantic in the Second World War. And he was put in charge of nuclear forces during the Cold War. You can imagine that if there was any hint that he was sort of popping off on his days off to hillsides to stare at the sky like Lynn Keach, you could just imagine that he wouldn't stay in that position for very long, would he? So Lord Hill Norton was one of the sanest, most level-headed men you could imagine. But he spoke quite openly about the UFO issue. He brought it up in the House of Lords. Timothy has in this book, it contains a dialogue between Timothy and Lord Hill Norton. So it's an amazing book, absolutely definitive book. And just a couple of years later, this fine figure of a gentleman came on the scene. This year is Dr. Stephen Greer. He's a doctor, as I say. And he comes from North Carolina, and he was head of the emergency department at a hospital. And then but he has had contact experiences, as he reports in his book, Forbidden Truth, Hidden Knowledge. Or is it the other way around? Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, apologies. And he talks about his various extraterrestrial experiences all his life. And in 1990, he set up the CSETI, the Centre for the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, or the study of extraterrestrial intelligence, not to be confused with SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, which is what's pointing at the sky, waiting for signals to come down, that Gary was talking about. And as he says, I'm just a country doctor from North Carolina. Dr. Stephen Greer, a very, very modest man indeed. And he started doing these lectures on various stages like this, and the Disclosure Project was set up soon after CSETI, and he began a campaign in government and briefing directors of the CIA, etc., to get a full and complete acknowledgement of the UFO issue, in the same way that Sir Eric Gary did 2 decades earlier. Now, this all came to a head in May of 2001. Now, the Disclosure Project press conference, May the 5th, 2001, was held at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., where Dr. Stephen Greer presented witness testimony from some of the various whistleblowers that he had been collecting information from, and data and interviews with over the last few years. The actual interview DVDs are now available for free online. There's over 4 hours of testimony. This was condensed down to an hour and a half for some of the best of it. And this took place amongst an enormous amount of publicity. This was streamed live on the internet, and in 2001, I mean, it shows how much the internet's changed. The idea of streaming live press conferences was actually quite a rare thing. This was one of the first, and it became the most popular at the time ever. I think there were 40,000 at its peak, something like 40,000 viewers. And here we see Dr. Greer opening the book. It was opened by a famous actor, and then the actor introduced Greer. I can't remember the actor's name. Introduced Greer. Greer introduced all the other witnesses that came up one at a time. Is this Mark Hall's not here by any chance, is he? Mark Hall? No. That's a guy I know who actually was at this press conference. He actually was in the audience. This is one of the most important witnesses. John Callahan, his name is. Now, he was head of the Special Incidents Investigation Branch of the Federal Aviation Administration, which means basically he was the guy who was concerned with the airspace of the United States and any untoward incidents that happened to aircraft in that area. And he knew from the very, very start that UFOs were a part of that. The airline pilots from all airlines, from foreign and domestic carriers, were encountering unidentified flying objects regularly. And this came to a head in 1986 when a large, an enormous aircraft was seen by a freight aircraft, a cargo aircraft flown by Japanese Airlines off the coast of Alaska. And he says, like all the witnesses, he says he's willing to sign an affidavit, which just means that he can't lie about it, otherwise we'll get in serious trouble, and he'll swear, but under oath, in front of the Congress in the United States. This is Charlie Brown, or he calls himself Charles Brown, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Brown. He's a World War II veteran, and after the war, he went and worked for the Air Force Office of Special Intelligence, and he got involved with Project Sign, Project Virgin, Project Blue Book. And he said that the evidence within that convinced him that the UFOs were real. So like J. Allen Hynek, who was also involved in that project, Mr. Brown here is absolutely convinced that the UFOs, he's without a doubt, he says he'll swear, he'll stake his reputation on it. Captain Robert Salas. Now I was saying earlier on about Lord Hill Norton, and about how the skeptics all think we're crazy, we're all lunatics, we're schizotypal disorders, they say, that a lot of us are suffering from. Captain Robert Salas was a member of a profession who, by its very nature, meant that his psychiatric health was more carefully screened than anybody else in any other profession on earth. Because Captain Robert Salas had his finger on the nuclear button. He was at the end of a chain of command, which led from the President of the United States to the missile bunkers, the control bunkers underneath the missile silo, close to the missile silos, which would lead to the launch of nuclear missiles, strategic nuclear missile deterrence against the Soviet Union and its allies. If he had any loose screws, the world would end, basically. So the idea that this man can be called crazy or suffering from any kind of psychiatric disorder, it's insulting to him and to our intelligence. And people, the skeptics who say these sort of things really should think twice before saying them. They really ought to, because they discredit themselves as a result. But this guy, he was at actually the second UFO Truth Magazine conference. I got to speak to him. He told me that his job was quite boring, and that was good, because if it ever got interesting, it would be his last day on Earth, and it would be for everybody else's, he said. So he quite liked the boring days. But what happened in 1961, he was at his bunker, which they call a capsule, which is 60 feet underground, and he got a call from the security guard up on the surface saying, "There's some strange lights outside the gate." And he said, "Okay, right. Investigate, get back to me." And shortly after that, the missiles in the silos, which were spread over a wide area, there's like hundreds of square miles, almost at the same time they all broke down. And there's no explanation for that. And it took them a long time, it took them days, I think, to get them started up again. This is Carl Wolf, and this is Donna Hare. Now these people were involved in the space program, and they are standing there, they testify that NASA is part of the truth embargo. Because NASA is editing its data, its photographic footage, its films, its reports from the astronauts and things like that, to cover up the fact there is intelligent life out there, and the astronauts in the space program encounter it all the time. This includes structures built on the moon. And basically these photographs come in from space. They're taken to NASA. NASA take these photographs. They don't just hand them over to the press. They look at them first and they edit them. And they use techniques including airbrushing, clipping, cutting, cropping of the pictures. And there are structures. There are structures on the moon. There are probably structures on other planets as well, which at the time no one had got to the other planets when this happened. But now, of course, there are craft on other planets. And there are probably structures there. And they're probably doing the same thing today. Because if there are creatures out there that can build things on the moon, they probably built them on Mars as well. This is Larry Warren, who was going to be here today, actually. He couldn't make it, unfortunately, but you could have seen the real thing and not had to deal with a photograph. This man, I think, is the key witness to the Rendlesham Forest incident of 1980, which Gary alluded to in his first speech. Despite many vociferous claims to the contrary, I think he is. If you read his book, Left Eastgate, if you're in any way rational, you will agree. Now this is George Filer, and he was a pilot. He was an Air Force pilot, and he carried out mid-air interceptions similar to the one that Milton Torres was involved in. He was, obviously, when he was patrolling the skies at one point, he was ordered to intercept an unknown object at high speed. He had to dive from 30,000 feet to 10,000 feet or something like that in order to achieve this goal. And of course, which meant that he was, like all the pilots, were being used to gather data on extraterrestrial life by the authorities. He was ordered not to say anything about it, but now he is speaking out, and he is willing to sign an affidavit and swear under oath in front of Congress that this is the case. This lady is Dr. Carol Rosin. She is, her testimony is one of the most interesting of all, and I'm going to come to that later on, okay? But she was talked about the possibility that in their disinformation and distortion of the extraterrestrial issue, at one point, if they feel there's no other choice, the government might drop the pretense that extraterrestrials are real, but will give us a distorted version of what they are, and try to make us see them as in ways in which they are not, in order to suit the government, to get them off the hook, and to make us respond in the way they want us to. And that all went terribly wrong as well. A few months later, September 11th, 2001, the impetus, Steve Bassett, Dr. Stephen Greer had all said this, In May, when this happened, it seemed as if we were going to get another UN. It was like the UN in 1978. It seemed as if we were on the path. We were gathering the momentum to go to the bottom of the hill. And then it all went wrong, and that impetus was lost. September 11, 2001, the attacks of 9/11. Again, you ask yourself, was this done specifically to stop that disclosure momentum? I personally think there are many reasons why 9/11 was done, and this might be one of them. But even if it wasn't, there's no doubt at all that the keepers of the secret, just like they did with Gary and the bishop could, there's no doubt that the keepers of the secret would exploit the opportunity even if they hadn't created it. They would take advantage of it. Dr. Stephen Greer has still kept himself busy, and here he is having a very heated debate with somebody who has spoken on this platform, I believe, Kerry Cassidy of Project Camelot. Greer has a view, he believes that the aliens are essentially all good. They're all good guys, they're nice, they're friendly, because he has met the good guys. Kerry disagrees, and there was quite a heated debate, which you can see on YouTube. It's quite amusing, I think, to watch. From what I've seen, I think Greer has, there are very nice aliens, there are ETs that are very friendly, and I'll come on to this later, but the extraterrestrials actually exhibit a very wide array of behaviours, and they seem to have lots of different agendas. And here we are, Dr. Stephen Greer is boasting again, typically. I like your story, Steve, I like your story. Kerry, I think, can see through it as well. Dr. Stephen Greer has produced a film called Sirius most recently, which is, there's not that much original in it, I would say, but it's still worth watching because he talks about various things that he's doing, including analysis of this all-humanoid, Atacama humanoid, which may or may not be ET, rather like the Star Child skull that Gary was talking about. Then, shortly after Dr. Stephen Greer, another guy comes up to the plate, grabs his bat, and that is Stephen Bassett. He's the executive director of the Paradigm Research Group, which is very similar to CSETI and the Disclosure Project. The difference is, I think, CSETI includes things such as skywatching, it includes the classic ufology areas like that. Steve Bassett is primarily a political advocate. He doesn't even use the term UFO, he just likes it. If you use it in front of him, he'll correct you. He'll say they're extraterrestrial craft. And he's currently at work right now trying to end the truth embargo, as he calls it, which is the cover-up, to try and get all the facts out, basically, get the government to come clean on what they know. Or what they know, we don't know how much they know. There's a guy called Robbie Graham who's written a good book on flying saucer. And Robbie thinks perhaps the government don't know much more than we do. And then they're just scared that they don't want to show up their own lack of knowledge. Possibly, but we need to know what they know. They shouldn't be keeping it from us, even if it's just a tiny bit more. This is the famous citizen hearing on disclosure. This took place in the very same room as that event in May 2001, which Dr. Stephen Greer organised. This was also streamed live online, and I watched it. It was really quite gripping. It was because of the time differences. I was on the early shift that week because I was portering in those days, and it was very well timed because it began just after I got home from work because it's a 6-hour time difference. And basically, rather like Dr. Stephen Greer, it was rather than a press conference, it was the witnesses speaking to 6 former members of the US Congress who were employed privately to do what they would do during a normal congressional investigation. And it was an enormous success. It went down really, really well. There's Dr. Stephen Greer there and Steve Bassett sitting beside each other on the panel. You might recognise these chaps. Well, there's Gary there, on the left, our esteemed editor, and Peter Robbins, sitting next to him, is a co-author with Larry Warren of Left at Eastgate. And this went a long way. I mean, it led to the Congressional Hearing Initiative, which Steve Bassett is involved in now, and we'll hopefully, I'll be talking later about how I think that's going to go, or whether there's any news on how it's going to go at all. And underlying all these activists, standing behind these various activists, is the theoreticians. And this is one of the biggest theoreticians within the movement. This is Richard Dolan. Now he is a political scientist, he's a historian, and he's trained at Oxford, so he's part of that elite. He's very, very highly respected, just like Timothy Good and Lord Hill Norton. He's part of the top of his profession. He's not a wacko, he's not a wingnut. He doesn't fall into any of the categories that the skeptics try to crowbar us into. He was doing a dissertation on Cold War ins and outs of politics, and he read Timothy Good's Above Top Secret as a research textbook, and reading that book changed his life. He moved on from that into full-time UFO studies, which he's been doing for the rest of his life. And he said, I don't think he's been to this event, but if he's ever in the country, you should get him here. So, in conclusion, from all what's been gathered so far, despite the many setbacks, there's not only is there no doubt, I think, that extraterrestrials are real, but there is a saucer in the hangar somewhere. And saucer in the hangar is a kind of tongue-in-cheek phrase coined by Nick Pope, ironically. But there is definitive evidence, forensic evidence, from salvaged wreckage of craft that are not made by people. We don't know who made them, where they came from, but they're not from Earth. They're not made by human beings. They're from an intelligence other than that which is human. Maybe they come up from under the sea, like Gary was saying. Maybe they're interplanetary. Maybe they come from other dimensions. But they're not us. They're not weather balloons. They're not swamp gas. They're not mystical levitating lighthouses. And also, there are biological entities associated with these craft. These do appear, I mean, it's hard, sometimes it's hard to put a definition exactly on what these things are, but there's no doubt they are some kind, a lot of them appear to be some kind of craft which contains entities which appear to be biological, in a similar way to our spacecraft, but they're far, far more sophisticated. And the government know this. I believe the government has, along with the salvaging the wreckage of these craft, the various crash retrievals, which happen more often. It's not just Roswell. I mean, Roswell was not even the first. Roswell has become a kind of generic term for these various UFO events, these extreme crash retrievals, these extreme CE2 events which leave all this evidence. But Colin Wolford's here. He showed me a book last time we were here about, what's the title of it, Colin?
I think it's Magical, I think.
Yeah, it gave examples of over 100 of these reported crash retrievals around the world. If just 10% of those are real, we're looking at a regular occurrence. So that's the situation we're in. That somebody within the breakaway civilization, as Richard Dolan calls it, knows of this. Doesn't mean that David Cameron knows it, doesn't mean Barack Obama knows it. Maybe they do. We don't know. So are they going to tell us? That's the question. Stephen Bassett thinks they will. Stephen Bassett thinks we are going to see a situation in which we'll see the President of the United States. It might be this guy, it might be Hillary Clinton, we don't know, it depends when it happens. Literally sit in the Oval Office where he works, in front of a TV camera and say, ladies and gentlemen, extraterrestrials are real. They are real, and we've always known, we've known about it, we're telling you now. And of course, this will be repeated all over the world. Whichever country you're in, you will see your head of government make a similar statement. It's not the kind of thing you can do in one country and leave the others. It's not possible. It wouldn't even have been possible in the Cold War, I think, with the Soviet Union being shut off from the media and things like that, from Western media. I mean, even then, I think it would have been impossible. It would certainly be impossible now. So once disclosure happens, that's it. The balls are, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. It's a one-way street. Now, the effects of disclosure, I don't have time to go into this in detail now, but I've done an entire talk on this called Energy, Politics and UFOs, which I've performed in various places, and there's a studio version of it online. But to cut a long story short, it's the power plants and propulsion systems of these craft have been, maybe not, they don't know everything about them. Maybe Robbie Graham is partly right, and there's even the highest levels, there's still mysteries associated with these objects. But they have at least in some way understood how they work. And this ties in, I think, with things outside the UFO issue to do with humans, people who have invented free energy. And for some reason they can never achieve success, they can never market their product, they can never develop it, because the people who hold the purse strings and develop it, they stop them. Nikola Tesla is the best example, but there are many, many others going back into the late 19th century. But if we are dealing with some craft which have a power plant, a propulsion system which runs off free energy, zero-point energy, and has the ability to produce anti-gravity, then it would transform the world in ways we cannot imagine. One of those would be the environmental destruction we're currently experiencing. It doesn't matter whether you believe in man-made climate change or not. There's no doubt about it. Our activities are adversely affecting the environment and threaten to destroy the planet and make it unsuitable for life. The declassification of free energy would solve that problem in one fell swoop. The declassification of free energy would take some of the poorest people in the world and would lift them out of their deprivation completely. It would give the countries in which these people live a standard of living like they've never seen before. There would not be a third world and a West anymore. It would be, they would reach a standard of living comparable to our own. It would alleviate so much suffering is caused by the fact that this truth embargo, cover-up, whatever you call it, is going on. Both the earth and the environment and human beings. We could have we could have had a world 100 years or more ago like this. We could have had a world which would be infinitely better than the one we have now. I'm not necessarily a utopian, or maybe there's no such thing as utopia that's possible, but it would be a vast improvement on what we have now. If you think about use of anti-gravity cars, the fact that talking about the starving people in some countries, it's often caused by a lack of water. The ability to desalinate seawater without any cost and move it without any cost to where it's needed to irrigate farmland, where there's drought conditions in deserts. It would increase the yield of farmland dozenfold. I mean, it seems so wonderful, doesn't it? It's like a dream. This is the world we will have in the future at some point, I'm sure. We could have had it now. I mean, there's nothing bad about it. It's all good. Surely nobody would want to stop that, would they? Who could possibly stand against this? Yeah. This is just the start of it. I mean, you're going to have to go up to the chairman of Royal Dutch Shell and say, knock on his office door, go into his big, massive office, probably bigger than this room. I've just come to tell you, your services are no longer required. Have you ever thought about going into some other business? I mean, you still need oil to make candles. Shell candles. That's got to be a boom, hasn't it? That's got to be a dollar out of that, hasn't it? Shell candles. They're nicely coloured. They smell nice. They won't stain your wallpaper. I don't think so. The oil, it's not just the biggest industry on earth. It is the industry on earth. And that's just, there's some people who will lose an awful lot of money. And they're just the people there's people who care about money only, and there's other things as well. It's a political strategy as well as just about money and greed. On the lower level, there's just some greedy materialists. Higher up, there's people with an agenda that goes beyond mere money. And there's also the issue, what effect would it have on our culture to know that we're not alone in the universe? We're not this tiny little oasis in a vast cosmic desert of inorganic compounds, carbon compounds, noble gases and things like that, and stars and stuff. I think it would, well, of course it would have enormous benefit from our point of view, but from the powers that be, maybe it wouldn't be so good. Because in 1959, at the very start of the space program, an organisation called the Brookings Institute published a report which said if NASA, which had just been formed at the time, was just designing its first rockets, this was just shortly after the Sputnik launch, if NASA discovered signs of intelligent extraterrestrial life out there, it might not be a good idea to shout it from the rooftops. They were concerned about things about what would happen to us as would we as a people be able to cope with that knowledge? I think we would. I mean, but this. What I'm saying is, we've got to see it through the eyes of these people, these very patronising patriarchs who see us as vulnerable children at best, if not just farm animals. And then they're thinking, well, what should we tell them? They were concerned about the church. I mean, aliens are not mentioned in the Bible, so the churches would have a problem with that, they believe. Maybe they would. I mean, it depends which religion we're talking about, because I think Islam would probably cope okay, because there is mention of the jinn in Islam. Buddhists wouldn't mind, probably, but we're talking Christian terms here, Christianity, which is still the dominant religion of the West, and especially in the United States, especially in the 1950s. I mean, you weren't a Christian, you weren't an American. What if the church fell? America would fall. But it gets even worse. We were talking before about the agendas of the extraterrestrials. Who are they? What are they? What do they want? And it does get nasty. And this next photograph has a trigger warning, okay? Because you might find it disturbing, but this is important for you to understand, because this is exactly what the people involved in this truth embargo are thinking. This poor animal here has been affected by what's known as the mysterious mutilation phenomenon. Farm animals across the world are affected by it. Also wild animals, zoo animals, pets, and sometimes even humans are affected by this. And this is the bad. Even some of the researchers into animal mutilation they balk at the idea that humans are among the list of species that these creatures are doing to this to. But why, if you were an extraterrestrial, why wouldn't you? Why would you see? It's possible they don't see humans as any different to any other species. Or we're a particularly intelligent species, we're an ape, we walk upright, we have these unique feet, things like that, we don't climb trees, but we're still an ape. It's possible that the extraterrestrials don't regard us as special, as we see ourselves as special. We see ourselves as animals and humans. But as Charles Darwin pointed out, a long time ago, we are animals. We see ourselves as special, but from the outside, from a more intelligent and more advanced civilization or creature, we just may be another little interesting little varmint to poke and prod. Abductions. This is another thing. It's going to have to come out. Millions of people are affected by this. I'm going to show you something. You can see I might undo my shirt. Don't worry, it's not that kind of show. This is why I need both hands free. I've got a mark on my arm. I don't know how many of you can see that. There's a mark on my arm, looks like a circle with two little holes in, little circles in. That is, I discovered that a couple of years ago. Didn't think much of it. I mentioned it at the time in one of my videos, so I thought it was strange. It may just be a birthmark or something. Last year, someone scanned me, and I was checked over with a radio frequency wand, and a metal detector, electromagnetic field detector, and they found, and it was discovered there was a pulse coming from me in that area of my body at 4 megahertz, I believe. And I don't know what it is. Unlike some people, I have no memory of any experience that would lead me to think that someone or something had put something into my body that was radiating radio pulses. But it seemed, I haven't had it confirmed that it's there. I can't go to my doctor and say, could you please scan me, send me for an MRI, because I think space aliens have put something in my... He'd refer me, all right, wouldn't he? It's a psychiatric clinic. But this is just, I mean, I consider myself lucky. It's just an example of the kind of things that people have to put up with. And I know people who've got them inside their eyeballs. I met a man he's become a friend of mine, who has them inserted into his jaw, objects which appear to be designed to constrict the dental nerve and cause him an awful lot of pain. And I had toothache last weekend, just for a few days, and I can't imagine how it must feel. And there's people with them inside their brains in places where you can't imagine how they got there. You can't insert these things surgically into the heart of the brain. You kill the person who's putting it in there. So the government's going to have to say, yes, there are creatures out there that are taking people, millions of people. I think 2% of the American population claim to have been abducted. And we don't know, we can't stop them. Our army, our air force can't stop these people, can't stop these creatures coming and taking you with impunity, like they did in Linda Napolitano. They can just lift you out of your bed and fly you through the window. We can't stop them doing it. So the government to say that the government have a major credibility problem is an understatement. I mean, expenses and duck ponds and things like that is nothing to this. Now, there's also, I've got to be brief now. There's also right you are, yeah, I've got, thanks Tina. There's also the issue that this technology, whether it comes from extraterrestrial craft or not, has been turned into a weapon. And I believe this weapon has been deployed, it has been used in combat, and it was used on December 11th, 2001. Right Honourable Paul Hellyer MP, former Defence Minister of Canada, he has spoken out about this because he's read this book, Where Did the Towers Go, by Dr. Julie Wood, which actually goes into detail about this entire issue. But it looks likely, we don't know, it could be that the powers that be have taken what humans have invented and they have turned it into these weapons. It doesn't necessarily mean it came from an extraterrestrial source, but based on what I've been talking about the crash retrievals, about what Gary has talked about the knowledge that the government are having, the way they're so cagey about the whole UFO thing, it is likely that it's possible that the government got the idea from one of these crash retrievals, one of these extraterrestrial crash retrievals. And they also have to think about how we are going to react. No, it's not just the secrets they've been keeping from us. The fact that, for whatever reason, the free energy issue, the suppression of free energy is quintessential to their power on Earth. For whatever reason. With free energy, they can't rule us. Maybe we wouldn't need them. Because it would abolish scarcity, and scarcity equals dependency equals control. But there's also, they're going to have to, Obama sitting in his White House office, President David Cameron sitting outside Parliament, they're going to have to say, we are telling you about this, we're telling you about something that we have known for an awfully long time. We kept it secret. We kept it secret not for your benefit, but for ours. We kept it secret at the very opposite of benefit, extreme deprivation. You have suffered enormously because of our silence. But we'll make it up to you, we'll bring back school milk. Unlikely, isn't it? Grab your torch and pitchforks, because I'll be at the head of the mob. I really will be. All these issues are ones that are being considered in the secret meetings of whoever is behind all this, whoever it is, the breakaway civilization, as Richard Dolan calls them, whatever, the Illuminati, the Majestic 12, whatever you choose to call them, they're sitting having these meetings, they're talking about these very subjects. And it's what they're considering these things. And I'm split over this whole issue, and I'm nearly done now. They have several choices. They can go ahead with disclosure, if they want. You can get the president, whether it's Obama or whether it's the next one, standing up there and saying it's all real, I'm doing this and risking it. And well, there's some interesting signs actually. I was talking to Stephen Bassett just the other day, and if you listen to my radio show, you might have heard my interview with him. There's been some coverage in the media we've never seen before. It seems, makes me wonder what's going on. They can continue with the truth embargo indefinitely, because they dug them, not for the various reasons, including the fact they dug themselves a hole they can't get out of, for what I was saying, because they have to admit they've kept it secret for so long. Or they can do something else. This is what I think is the most likely scenario we're looking at here. This is a still from a film called The Earth versus Flying Saucers from 1956. It's an interesting film, partly because the title gives away the plot. So they could have chosen a better title actually. But it was made with the assistance of ufologists. So the actual UFOs you see in the film are actually quite accurate. There was a spoof version based on this film by Tim Burton called Mars Attacks, which is hilarious. You'll see it. It has the same craft in it. And it is basically about hostile extraterrestrials coming to the Earth and trying to destroy it, and brave humans standing up to them and eventually defeating them. This is the plot, of course, of Independence Day, which is virtually the same thing. I think we could, this is where we come back to Dr. Carol Rosin. Is what she's saying, she had an interview with Werner von Braun, former Nazi SS rocket scientist, who said that the last card the powers that be would play, rather than disclosing, would be, well, they're real, but they're bad guys, and we've got to unite. We've got to unite, we need a world government. We need a world military. We need a unification of humanity to fight back against this extraterrestrial threat. And they may say that, and just because they say that, if you hear the government say that, doesn't mean it's true. They could be just saying that, because really, I can't think of any other way they can come out of it by keeping their nose clean and maintaining their... I think this is the most likely outcome of all this. But I have no definitive answers, unfortunately. There's no conclusions here. I'm very split between the idea that willing disclosure is possible. There's a part of me that can't let go. It's just too... It's too wonderful, it's too lovely to sort of like drop. But there's another part of me that says willing disclosure, that's like the Bassett, the Greer, and all these other guys want, is not possible. Doesn't mean I'm defeatist, it doesn't mean, I think there is an answer to this. That we may not, I think it is going to come. I feel optimistic, I think there's hope here. Now if you want to know more, actually I've got a book coming out. I've been writing a book. This book I'm hoping to launch within the next month. It depends how quickly I can finish it. It's called Roswell Rising, a novel of disclosure. It is a novel, it's a fictional story that I've made up, I've written. And, but it tells a story in fictional allegory, and many of the issues that I've spoken to you about tonight. And I don't have time to go into detail now, but I do think there is hope here. I'm not a defeatist. The truth embargo is an immovable object, maybe. But it is about, to me, an irresistible force. And it may not, when that happens, it may not be so immovable after all. We don't know yet, but we will find out sooner or later, I think. If you want to know more, you can read this book. If you want to read the sample chapter, I've actually published chapter 1 on the website. Go to Ben's bookcase, you can scroll down, you can read the first chapter of that novel for nothing. When the book comes out, it'll cost about £7, something like that. But I hope it will give you some idea. It may illustrate some of the conflict within myself, some of the disagreements I have with Stephen Bassett as well, and some of the and some of the other things that perhaps I am not certain of either. But you have to read it to find out. That's a shameless plug. But do check out the first chapter. I believe there's going to be future exopolitics movements like Sir Eric Gary's, like Stephen Bassett's, like Stephen Greer's. As I said, there's been serendipity here on the part of the powers that be. If they didn't create situations like the Bishop coup, like 9/11, then they've exploited them. But how much longer can their serendipity last? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well done, very entertaining. Thank you very much. Now it's 2 o'clock, just before you dash off. There is hot dogs and cake in the vending seat.